I shouldn't have said anything that night, at a Christmas party, at that hour when the room is bathed in golden light and everyone's smiles seem to be tacked on with a thread of politeness. You sit with your head down, casually shaking your glass of watered-down wine, secretly begging that damn lottery won't make you look ridiculous in front of your colleagues. But then my boss turned his glass in my direction and said so loudly the words echoed across the table like boulders, "So, how did you like your $9,000 bonus this year?" My blood ran cold. 9,000, the number dropped on the room like a bomb, and all eyes turned to me as if I were being handed a prize for which I hadn't even had time to say thank you. My fork froze mid-flight, my throat tightened with surprise. I didn't get a penny, not a cent, and for a split second I thought I'd simply misheard, that it was someone making a joke, but he kept smiling. And the vice president at the far end of the table nodded as if he were sealing the company's generosity. My colleagues fidgeted in their seats, some eyes gleamed with envy, others reflected respect, but you felt a tightness inside, like a handful of heavy sand had been poured into your chest. I forced a smile and muttered, "I don't get it," and then HR froze. It was a tiny moment, a split second, but I saw it. The HR director's glass hovered in the air a little too long, her gaze slid from me to my boss. A pause you notice when you're living at the edge of your abilities. She coughed, smiled again. And the conversation dragged on, but I saw and heard it differently. Everything inside me was screaming. The rent was due in 5 days, my child's winter coat was held to the sleeve with duct tape, I was skimping on gas, skipping breakfast, counting every little detail. For me, that 9,000 wasn't a bonus, it was the lifeline I needed to survive, and, apparently, somewhere in the accounting records, that amount existed, just not in my hands. When the dishes were cleared, I quietly went to the staff restroom, locked the stall, pulled out my phone, and opened the payroll section, and there, in the most reliable line, it read, "Vacation bonus BN09, processed, amount, $9,000, status, paid." But my bank account was silent, nothing had arrived, nothing was expected, nothing was pending, emptiness. My heart was pounding so hard that I had to lean against the cold tile and try to figure out if this was a glitch, an error, or something much worse. I stared at the small code BN09, and next to it, in faint, tiny letters, a strange word flashed, something like retype pending. I didn't know the exact meaning, but it was a far cry from Merry Christmas. Returning to the hall felt like entering enemy territory. The chandeliers were blinding, the boss's laughter drowned out the conversation, and HR only looked up from the desserts for a moment. No one was looking at me anymore, and that silence spoke louder than any spoken words. By the time I got home, the holiday cheer had dissipated, leaving behind only the muffled hum of the refrigerator and a stack of bills on the desk. I sat down, turned on my laptop, and checked the accrual section 3 times. The result was the same, the bonus had been processed, but my account was empty, and then I realized I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't wrong, that someone had interfered, and the question began to well up, who did it and for what purpose? I felt a cold, clear determination awaken within me. The kind that comes when there's no other choice. If they'd thought I'd remain silent, how wrong they were. They didn't know me as well as they thought. The next morning, I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on spreadsheets, numbers, and documents, though my gaze kept returning to the screen, where new emails flashed, company newsletters, holiday memes with reindeer and snowmen, notifications about paid time off, the standard "don't forget to record your hours," all that noise of the office end fire, which is usually simply annoying, but now seemed like a dull background, through which only one line broke through, and my eyes couldn't help but get stuck. A draft of an email with the subject "Vacation Bonus Discrepancy." I started it, deleted it, rewrote it, deleted it again, until my fingers began to tremble with fatigue and irritation, and finally, making up my mind, I hit send. "Hello, I believe there may have been an error in payroll calculation. My holiday bonus BN09 is marked as processed in the system, but the funds have not been credited to my account. Could you please confirm its status?" I read it again before the email disappeared, feeling my palms grow clammy and my heart pounding somewhere too high in my throat. The reply arrived faster than I expected, less than 20 minutes later. "Thank you for letting me know. There may have been a delay in processing the payment at your bank. Please allow 1 or 2 business cycles and contact us if the amount still hasn't arrived." Clear, dry, automatic. As if this email were a template sent to hundreds of others like me. I swallowed and typed a reply. I understand, but I received my main salary on time, only the bonus is missing. Can you confirm that the transfer was indeed completed? And hit send. After that, the silence stretched on, no notification, no auto-reply, no polite assurance that the matter was under consideration. I spent the rest of the day on autopilot, mechanically replying to colleagues and mechanically signing documents, until evening settled over the office like thick cotton wool. At home, I opened my laptop again and checked the invoice. Same thing, empty. And then I returned to the line on the screen, where the gray letters stubbornly repeated the same thing, red AG pending. I stared at them until they floated, turning into shapeless symbols, as if they wanted to dissolve, so I would stop torturing myself with questions. In the morning, barely able to sleep, I discovered a new email. Hello, we've checked your payroll entry, everything is in order on our end. Sometimes larger bonuses are routed through secondary accounts for retention purposes. This is standard practice. Please wait until the next cycle. I reread the phrase "for retention purposes" several times. My heart began to pound unevenly, as if trying to escape. What are these goals I'm hearing about for the first time? And why hasn't anyone mentioned them before? I opened Slack and messaged David, the only person in the payroll department I trusted. We often stayed late, editing reports together and laughing about how the office coffee tasted like warm paper. Hey, David, what does red AG pending mean? It's in my bonus line, I typed. He didn't respond for a minute, then a typing notification appeared, then immediately disappeared, and a few seconds later he sent a single emoji, a gray, petrified face. That stupid icon chilled me. As if I'd peered into an abyss, I typed, "Is this bad?" The reply came quickly, "You can't talk here. Check the stub carefully. If you see manual edit, that's not good." My fingers trembled as I scrolled down the page, and there it was, barely visible, gray, as if deliberately hidden, manual change BN09. I took a screenshot before I realized my breathing had become short and my hands had gone limp. That evening, I went to see Janet, my friend, who had once been an accountant and now owned a small shop selling mugs and candles. We sat in her kitchen, which smelled of cinnamon and orange peel, and, trying not to tremble, I laid out the printed letters and screenshots in front of her. Janet studied everything silently, squinting, and finally said quietly, almost in a whisper, "It looks like someone intercepted the payment. A withholding adjustment is what they sometimes call cases where they want to withhold bonuses for employees before they leave. But this is different. This is manual control. Someone did it themselves, manually." The words hit me like a stone thrown through glass. Something inside me crunched, as if I finally realized the scale of what was happening. Someone with access to the system had opened my bonus, assumed I wouldn't see it, and pressed a button to redirect the money. I sat there for a long time, speechless, while the only sounds around me were the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ticking of the clock. Later, at the end of the week, HR showed up again. The voice in the email was the same, cheerful, polite, as if they were talking about the weather. "Hello. We're getting back to your question. Your bonus has been flagged for review as part of a withholding adjustment. We'll keep you updated. Thank you for your patience." Patience. A word that felt like a mockery. While they were checking, a lease notice with a red renewal expired sign stared at me from under a fridge magnet. A letter arrived from the school. My child's lunch payments were overdue, and all I had left was that very patience I could no longer afford. And then something inside me changed. Shame, confusion, fear, everything that had been gnawing at me like hungry dogs for the past few days suddenly retreated, transforming into something else, cold, clear, merciless. I felt a hardness like ice in my chest instead of trembling, and for the first time in a long time, my breathing became even. I opened my laptop, created a new folder on my desktop, and named it simply Bonus 2024. I carefully transferred every screenshot, every email, every short message, even the most insignificant notes, into this digital fortress, so that nothing, not a single detail, would get lost. Then I took my paper notebook, opened the first page, and wrote the title in large letters, "Manual," on the blank pages. I began to piece together the story, like a detective gathering evidence. Every word my boss uttered at the party, every reaction, every pause, HR's glance, David's emoji, everything lined up, a chain, a story I wouldn't let them rewrite. Line by line, I built a dossier, as if instinctively sensing that this was no longer just my personal misfortune. If they could do this to me, then they could do it to others. those who perhaps didn't even notice that something rightfully theirs had been taken from them. The more I wrote, the more I realized that this story wasn't an accident or a mistake, but someone's will, and if they thought I'd remain silent, that shame would make me lower my eyes, then they knew me very little. When the phone rang, I already knew what it was, HR. The voice was polite, even, but I sensed an underlying wariness, as if the person on the other end knew the conversation would be unpleasant. "We'd like to invite you to a short meeting to clarify a few details," she said. I agreed, and as I hung up, I felt a wave of calm, icy anger rise within me. The conference room was small, windowless, dimly lit, and heavy with the scent of carpeting, which seemed to absorb every word spoken. A printout of my pay stub lay on the table, neatly stapled to a corner like a school test. Two people sat at the table, the HR director, Beatrice, and a man from the payroll department I barely knew. Beatrice smiled, a measured, businesslike smile, as if it were part of her job description. "Thank you for coming," she began in her impeccably controlled voice. "We just want to clear up a little confusion." Confusion, the word flashed in my head like an alarm. I clenched my jaw, silently watching as she slid the sheet of paper toward me. "As you can see," she continued, "your bonus was processed and documented correctly. Sometimes, adjusting retention periods takes longer than usual. This is completely normal." I slowly pulled my notebook out of my bag, opened it to a page covered in lines and dates, and placed it in front of me. "I understand what the documents say," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "but I don't understand why my file says manually modified 4BN09. Can you explain what that means?" There was a pause. The man next to her fidgeted nervously and glanced at Beatrice, but she continued to smile, though I noticed her fingers tightened around her pen. Her knuckles whitened. "It's just an internal code," she answered too quickly. "Nothing to worry about." I leaned forward and said quietly, clearly, "This means someone manually cancelled my bonus. It's not a mistake. Who did it?" The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Beatrice's smile wavered slightly, and her eyes darkened for a moment. Then she carefully closed the folder, as if putting a period. "We'll review your question and contact you," she said evenly. I took out a pen and wrote down her words. The date, and the time. She noticed this and, without losing her polite tone, said, "You don't have to take notes." "Yes, I will," I replied, for accuracy. Her gaze turned cold, and for the first time, there was something resembling a warning in her voice. "We appreciate your consideration," she said, "but please understand that excessive worry may impact your productivity." There it was, a subtle, almost imperceptible, yet perfectly clear warning. I felt the metallic taste of anger rising in my throat, but I merely nodded, picked up my folder, and stood. As I left the room, the noise from the hallway hit my ears like a bright light after darkness. Coworkers were laughing, someone was handing out secret Santa gifts, someone was arguing over whose mug was the prettiest. None of them even suspected that behind the closed door they had just tried to silence me, quietly, carefully, with a smile and thanks for my patience. But I knew, this was not the end, but the beginning. That night, I went through everything again, scanning every folder, every piece of handwriting, every email and meeting note, and uploaded it to a cloud drive under the most inconspicuous and boring name possible, as if I were trying to hide the truth among gray files that no one would open casually, like burying a letter. Then I sat down at my desk and started my own spreadsheet, where I marked each row with a date, a time, a participant, the nature of the interaction, a reaction, even those pauses in conversation that had once seemed unimportant to me but now formed a pattern, ugly and systematic. BN09, manual control, backup pool, and the more I scrolled through the entries, the clearer the pattern became. Janet, my old friend, the one who used to do the bookkeeping and now managed to find time to help me between the shelves of mugs and candles, pored over my manuscripts at the dinner table, watching that arrow I'd drawn between the codes, and finally muttered quietly, "Looks like bonuses are being transferred to the retention fund." Then her finger poked at the strange ST marker, and she pursed her lips. "But do you see that ST retention? It's not a standard account, someone designed it. Why build such an account?" I asked, and her answer sounded like a death sentence. She flipped the page and said calmly, "Diverting money, and if they don't document who exactly received it, that's fraud, period." The word fraud struck me in a different way than betrayal or error. It carried not only moral outrage but also the weight of the law. and the thought that now I had to act not only as a woman trying to keep a roof over her child's head, but also as a witness gathering evidence for the authorities who could act. I again sent an official request to HR, demanding a breakdown of exactly where my vacation bonus had been redirected. And when, 2 days later, I received the standard excuse about confidentiality of internal resource redistribution and the assurance that everything was done according to company policy, I wanted to smash my computer screen with my hand, because another brick in their wall of silence had been placed carefully, precisely, and deliberately. I forwarded the response to the compliance hotline because I needed at least one outside perspective, someone who didn't drink coffee in this immaculate HR bin and wouldn't defend the system out of inertia. That evening, as I was folding the now cold laundry in the dark kitchen, a payroll message from David lit up my phone, just 3 words, written as if they contained the anxiety of an entire world. Be careful, watch out. My heart seemed to stop. Watch what? I wanted to ask, but somehow I knew the answer. Watch your back, watch your work, watch how quietly the traps are laid so that no trace is visible. And from that moment it became clear to me that it wasn't just about the 9,000 anymore. It was about surviving in a place where the walls were slowly closing in, and if they were counting on me to shut up, they would soon find out that I could get very, very loud. They'd called the next meeting a clarification meeting, but the invitation had come from Beatrice in HR, and when I walked into the conference room, I saw my boss sitting casually, shirt off, sleeves rolled up, as if he owned the air himself, and Beatrice, as always, holding the same folder she wore like armor. Have a seat, she said, slightly casually, as if they were discussing the division of responsibilities and not my debts and the rent hanging on the refrigerator at home. I set my folder down in front of me, and now the pages inside felt heavier. Screenshots, chats, emails, a printed Slack log with timestamps, all of it stacked neatly. Beatrice started to speak in her sweet, even voice. We noticed you had some concerns about your holiday bonus and want to make sure there is no misunderstanding. But I didn't let her set the tone for our conversation, turning the page and pointing my finger at the entry, BN09 marked as manually processed return. I ran my pen over the line so she couldn't hide behind the generalities and asked, "This is not a misunderstanding, this is a transaction that never reached my account. Where did it go?" The silence stretched. My boss shifted nervously in his chair and exhaled through his nose like a bull about to charge. Then he said something that sounded like a jab. You know, sometimes employees don't understand the big picture. Retention adjustments are about long-term incentives. Not everyone needs the money right now. The words hit me like a cold hand on my cheek, and I felt my insides tighten, because they weren't just justifying the theft, they were attributing to me a lack of need for the funds, as if my right to them had been discussed without me. These words were like a slap in the face. "So, you decided," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "that my rent, my kids' lunches, my bills, all of that can wait because you apparently needed to retain me?" I stared straight at him, unblinking, even though everything inside me was tense to the point of ringing, and I felt like if anyone made another move now, I simply wouldn't be able to bear it. Beatrice, impeccable as always, leaned forward slightly and said softly, with studied politeness, as if she were speaking to a patient about to lose it, "Let's not get emotional. Company policy allows us to manage bonuses in a way that completely rules out fraud." Her words were measured, smooth, without a hint of roughness, but beneath that smoothness, there was a cold defensiveness, as if she were standing behind a wall of prepared excuses. I intervened, preventing them from pursuing the matter further. My hands were shaking, but to my surprise, her voice was firm, almost calm. "It was manual manipulation," I said. "Someone deliberately diverted my money, call it what you will, but the ledger doesn't lie, it's theft." For a second, my boss's expression faltered, the smile vanished, and in its place appeared something hard, tired, but unrepentant. He leaned closer to me, and his voice became low, slightly husky, the kind intended only for ears around this desk. "Careful," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "Putting too much pressure on things you don't understand can have consequences." I felt a chill run down my spine. There it was. The threat, open, without veils, uttered in daylight, amidst documents and coffee, in a sterile room previously teeming with dry reports and figures. I slowly opened my notebook, wrote down his words verbatim, and looked up. His gaze met mine, but he looked away first. Noted. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, as if the air conditioning had suddenly stopped working. Beatrice's pen tapped nervously against the edge of the desk, making a steady, irritating sound. My boss leaned back in his chair, as if trying to regain control of the situation, but the silence that fell between us was louder than any words. Then, 3 short, confident knocks on the door broke the viscous silence. It swung open, and 2 men in suits entered the room, stern-looking, holding ID cards. One stepped forward and, without looking at me, introduced himself. "Internal compliance, we'll need this room." Beatrice blinked, as if she didn't immediately understand what was happening. Her lips trembled, and my boss's face turned blotchy, flushing at the temples. "We're having a private conversation about personnel matters," he said sharply. But his voice was a tone higher than usual. "Not anymore," the older one replied, pulling out a tablet. "All matters related to BN09 adjustments have been placed on legal hold. Please hand over all documents and files you have prepared." The words rang out with such certainty that it seemed as if the balance in the room had momentarily shifted. For the first time since it all began, I felt a shift in weight. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the first real jolt. Beatrice, breathless, began frantically shuffling through the papers, trying to organize them. My boss mumbled something about a misunderstanding, about perhaps getting it all wrong. But the same person, in an internal composure, repeated, without any mitigation. "Effective immediately, no deletions, no changes, no file transfers, everything is to be retained." I sat motionless, feeling my palms stick to the cover of my folder. They hadn't asked for my notes, and in that silent omission, I caught the main point. They already knew who was holding the thread, who was keeping score. When the men in suits left, the room seemed empty. Beatrice muttered that they'd contact me later, avoiding my gaze, while my boss stared at the desk, his lips pressed together. I carefully gathered my papers, tucked them into my bag, and stood. I paused for a moment at the door, then turned and said evenly, "You were right about one thing, the general ledger really does tell the truth." Outside, my legs felt weak, as if I were treading water, but a feeling flared in my chest, not joy or triumph, but something deeper, warmer, akin to relief. Now I knew. I wasn't the only one keeping score. The investigation had begun in earnest, and it was moving faster than anyone expected. Within a week, the office was buzzing like a hive of gossip and speculation. People whispered in the hallways and saw men in suits sitting in a corner office with laptops, downloading data from payroll and HR systems. An official letter arrived, cold and dry, a demand to preserve all electronic communications. For most, it was just background noise, but I heard every hidden signal in the din. One morning, as I was typing up a report and trying not to attract attention, David from the payroll department quietly passed my desk. He didn't even look up, simply tossing down the folded piece of paper and moving on. I unfolded it, holding it in my lap. Just one line, handwritten. "They're tracking the red age group." You were right. Those words seemed to spark a light within me, taking my breath away. On Friday, when the air in the office seemed especially thick and tense, as if saturated with whispers and anxious anticipation, I was called into a separate conference room by the quality control department. 2 auditors were already waiting inside, their faces impeccably neutral, as if carved from stone, their voices even, their movements precise, not a single superfluous word, not a single attempt at polite conversation about the weather or the weekend. On the table in front of them lay printed spreadsheets, chains of approvals, traces of wire transfers, hand-highlighted corrections, like the company's dissected organism, where every artery could be seen. "Can you confirm that this is your payment?" one of them asked, pointing with a pen to the line highlighted in yellow, next to the familiar letters BN09. "Yes," I replied, feeling my stomach clench. "And is this your bank statement for the same period?" "Yes." They exchanged glances, nodded briefly, and made notes in their notebooks, while I sat, trying to breathe slowly so as not to betray my trembling. Then one of them turned the page, and I saw not just my entry but dozens of others. The names were blacked out, but the amounts remained visible. 5,000, 12,000, 8, 9, all with the same BN09 label, the same ominous reedy pool in the purpose column. I leaned forward, feeling my breath catch. "What happens after the money goes into that pool?" I asked, my voice muffled, as if from far away. The auditor's face didn't change a millimeter. "That's what we're looking into," he replied, without looking up. But I could already see it all. Arrows and lines drawn between tables connected this mysterious reserve fund to other documents marked special incentives for executives and discretionary HR initiatives. Everything suddenly came together to form a single, monstrously clear picture. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. They hadn't just stolen my bonus, they had been siphoning money from the entire system, quietly and methodically, creating a shadow beneath the official figures. That evening, sitting with Janet in the kitchen, I laid out the printouts I'd saved in front of her, a box of noodles from the nearby Chinese restaurant between us. She was silent for a long moment, looking at the documents, and then quietly, almost in a whisper, said, "This isn't negligence. This is deliberate." They created a shadow fund and funneled bonuses to their chosen few. I nodded, feeling a wave of anger rise in my chest. The chosen few. I remembered my boss's nephew, who had recently bragged about his new truck, and the photos from Beatrice's vacation, sandy beaches, wine, expensive hats. Suddenly, everything made sense, frightening and hurtful. On Monday morning, I received a letter from Beatrice. It began with her usual flawless greeting, "Hello. We would like to resolve this matter quickly and peacefully." Then followed a sentence, written in the language of legalese. "We are willing to pay you a one-time settlement of $9,000, plus an additional fee of $2,000, contingent on your signing a confidentiality agreement." I sat for a long time, staring at the screen until the letters swam before my eyes. They were trying to buy my silence. $10,000, the price of my voice, the price of the truth. I imagined those other people in the spreadsheet, their names hidden behind black bars. They probably didn't even know they'd been deceived. 10,000 could pay my rent, close my bills, buy my son a winter coat, allow me to breathe a sigh of relief, but if I agreed, I would become part of what I was fighting against. So I wrote a short reply, just one sentence: "I do not sign a non-disclosure agreement." A few minutes later, her reply arrived, sharp and icy: "We strongly recommend you reconsider your decision." But something inside me had already snapped, or perhaps, conversely, had finally snapped back into place. For the first time in months, I felt no fear. I had proof, and now everything they feared stood behind me. 2 days later, a notice appeared on the company's internal website, dry and signed. Some annual bonus adjustments were not consistent with internal policy. Corrective actions are currently being taken. People read it in the break room, the kitchen, and Slack, exchanging glances and whispering, "What does this mean?" Some asked, "Who are you talking about?" Others whispered. I simply nodded, as if I'd heard it by accident, and felt my heart pounding in my chest with a dull, powerful rhythm. Because now the walls were closing in not around me, but around them. And then, in mid-December, a week before Christmas, everything came crashing down. The email arrived at 9 in the morning, marked urgent. Management update effective immediately. CEO terminated for cause. HR director resigned. Interim management will be announced shortly. No explanation, no names, just cold, dry phrases with chaos ringing between the lines. The office erupted in a veritable buzz. People huddled in corners, discussing what they'd heard, what they'd seen, who'd deleted their emails. Slack channels lit up with fire emojis. Someone sent a picture of a leaning tower. Someone simply wrote, "Finally." And I sat at my desk, looking out the window at the first snow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt my breath return to my chest. I wasn't celebrating, not yet. That day, when it seemed the hallways had finally fallen silent and the air had become a little lighter, I was called again, this time by the compliance department, to the same glass-walled conference room where my hands had previously trembled and my heart had pounded. This time their faces were softer, not stern, but rather weary, as if people who had long held the truth inside had finally let it out. One of them, tall, with gray eyes, stood and handed me a thick envelope with the company logo. I took it, and when I opened the flap, the paper inside crackled, as if it contained more than just text. The letter, on company letterhead, began formally, "We sincerely regret that we made a mistake and did not pay you your bonus." Below it was written that I would be compensated for damages in the amount of $9,000, plus accrued interest and an additional $9,000. My hand shook as I held those pages, but not because of the numbers. It was the second page, carefully signed by the acting CFO, which plainly acknowledged a breach of trust and confirmed that all affected employees would be compensated for what was rightfully theirs. For weeks, months, I'd felt like an outsider, a burden, a woman easier to silence than to listen to, and now this letter lay before me, cold, formal. But it rang with the music of justice, even if it were written in dry legalese. The next day, I deposited the check on my phone screen. For the first time in a long time, the numbers looked not like mere fractions, but like a true breath of freedom. That evening, standing in the store, I filled my basket with groceries and didn't count every dollar, didn't cross things out in my head. I bought my child a winter coat, warm, thick, without patches or tape, one worthy of hanging in the school locker room. We ate dinner with the stove on full blast, and for the first time in months, I felt no guilt about the warmth of the house. But the story, of course, wasn't over. It merely changed the rhythm. Rumors of bonuses being misdirected for years spread through the floors faster than smoke after a fire. People talked about shadow funds, secret incentives for executives, special HR projects that existed only on paper. Dozens of employees received their money, along with letters of compensation and apologies. Some cried right at their desks when the deposits finally appeared in their accounts. A guy from the accounting department approached me in the hallway, gave me an awkward, man-to-man hug, and whispered, "You saved my mortgage." I just smiled and said nothing. I didn't tell him how close I'd been to signing that very same silence agreement, how I'd almost given up, tired of fighting. By the new year, the company completely overhauled its bonus system. No more manual adjustments, no more gray areas or suspicious pools. Everything was now subject to external audit. Every movement of funds was recorded and verified. Words like ethics and transparency were now used without irony at meetings. Compliance with the rules was once again the norm, not a formality. As for me, I had a decision to make. When a recruiter from a competing company contacted me, offering me a position with a signing bonus and the promise of working in an environment where honesty was valued, I didn't hesitate for a second. I submitted my resignation. In January, on my last day at work, I left the office carrying a cardboard box containing my headphones, my favorite mug, and several notebooks covered with notes that might have been the beginning of this whole story. I walked through a familiar lobby, the same one where I once stood, eyes downcast, while my boss and HR director laughed under the Christmas lights. But now the light seemed different, not blinding, but warm, as if imbued with the air of a new beginning, and it was as if fate itself had decided to show me a vicious circle. Just a week ago, I had seen this same boss walk through this very same lobby carrying the same box. His tie was loose, his face gray and tired, and the holiday lights above the doors still flickered, mercilessly illuminating the moment of his fall. The sight was etched in my memory like a quiet poem, like undeniable poetic justice wrapped in tinsel. That Christmas morning at home, I hadn't bought anything fancy, just a small fir tree, with real lights and the scent of pine needles, simple gifts wrapped in brown paper, and most importantly, a silence devoid of fear. My child ran into the room, laughing so loudly that even the dog barked in his joy. The house smelled of cinnamon, coffee, and a new beginning. I sat down in a chair, leaned back, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to breathe. Really, and for the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd long lost, relief, because the truth had reached me. Had reached all of us, and I was still standing, on my feet, in a light that no longer burned.